The massive chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with quiet conversations in dozens of different languages. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their assigned seats waiting for the day's session to begin. The air recyclers worked overtime to manage the different atmospheric requirements of so many species. Ambassador Zethkar adjusted his position on the speaking platform. His insect-like body clicked as he moved, and his 4 eyes scanned the assembled crowd. Today would be simple routine work, reviewing applications from primitive species who wanted to join galactic civilization. Most would be rejected, of course. Very few species had what it took to survive among the stars. Honored council members, Zethkar began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. Today we review application 2847C, submitted by the species calling themselves humans from the planet Earth in the Sol system. A few counselors looked up from their data pads with mild interest. Most continued their other work. New species applications were common and usually boring. General Krex, the Dominion's military representative, leaned forward slightly. His reptilian features showed the scars of many battles, and his yellow eyes focused intently on the data streaming across his display. "What do we know about their military capabilities?" he asked. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his people. Their military history is extensive. They have been fighting wars continuously for their entire recorded history. Currently, they maintain over 200 separate military organizations across their single planet. Counselor Veltara, an ancient energy being from the Ethereal Coalition, pulsed with soft blue light. Her voice came from speakers around the chamber since she had no physical mouth. 200 military groups on one world? That suggests severe instability. How have they survived so long without destroying themselves? Unknown, Zethkar replied. They seem to fight constantly but never quite eliminate each other completely. Their conflicts range from small border disputes to massive wars involving millions of soldiers. Most recently, they fought a global conflict that lasted 6 years and killed over 50 million of their people. The chamber grew quieter. Even the most warlike council species rarely saw casualties on that scale. General Krex pulled up more detailed files on his screen. Their technology appears primitive. Chemical rockets, metal projectiles, simple nuclear weapons. How did they achieve faster-than-light travel? That's what makes them interesting, Zethkar admitted. 3 years ago, they went from barely reaching their own moon to building a working FTL drive. No species in our records has made that leap so quickly. Usually it takes centuries to develop from basic spaceflight to interstellar travel. And now they want to join us, Veltara observed. What are they offering? Zethkar brought up the human application on the main display. The document was surprisingly short compared to most species' lengthy presentations. They offer scientific knowledge, cultural exchange, and what they call defensive assistance. They also request access to galactic trade routes and technological sharing agreements. Several counselors laughed at that. A species that had just learned to travel between stars wanted to trade technology with civilizations thousands of years older. Have they sent a representative? General Krex asked. Yes, Captain Sarah Chen of their diplomatic corps is waiting outside. Shall I bring her in? The council voted quickly. Why not see what these primitive humans had to say? Captain Chen entered the chamber a few minutes later, and the counselors got their first look at a living human. She was smaller than most galactic species, standing barely 6 feet tall. Her skin was smooth and soft-looking, with no natural armor or protective features. She wore a simple blue uniform and walked with confident steps despite being surrounded by beings who could easily crush her. Honored Council, she said, bowing slightly. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth government. Thank you for considering our application. Her voice was steady, showing no fear even though she was outnumbered thousands to one. Several counselors made notes about human courage or foolishness. Zethkar gestured for her to continue. Please explain why humanity believes it deserves membership in the Galactic Council. Chen activated a small device that projected images above her head. We offer diversity. Earth has over 7 billion humans living in hundreds of different cultures. We've learned to work together despite our differences. We also adapt quickly to new situations and solve problems in creative ways. The images showed Earth's cities, its varied landscapes, and scenes of humans working together on massive projects. It was impressive for such a young species, but nothing the Council hadn't seen before. General Krex leaned forward. Your military history concerns us. Species that fight constantly among themselves rarely make peaceful galactic citizens. Why should we trust you not to bring your wars to space? Chen nodded as if she had expected the question. Because we understand what real threats look like. Yes, we fight among ourselves. But when something threatens all of humanity, we unite incredibly quickly. Our recent global war ended when we realized we faced a common enemy. Within months, former enemies were fighting side by side. And your technology? Veltara asked. You've jumped from primitive rockets to FTL travel in just a few years. That's unprecedented. We're good at learning, Chen replied simply. When we discovered the theoretical principles of faster-than-light travel in an old probe sent by another species, our scientists figured out how to build a working drive in less than 2 years. We don't have the most advanced technology, but we're very good at making things work. The questioning continued for another hour. Chen answered every question honestly, admitting humanity's limitations while highlighting their strengths. She didn't try to hide their violent history or pretend they were more advanced than they actually were. Finally, Zethkar called for a recess so the council could discuss the application privately. What do you think? Veltara asked as the councilors gathered in small groups. General Krex scratched his scaled chin thoughtfully. They're honest, I'll give them that. Most species try to hide their weaknesses, but they're clearly too primitive for full membership. They've been in space for less than a decade. Their rapid technological advancement is interesting, another counselor noted, but concerning. Species that develop too quickly often destroy themselves or become threats to others. Zethkar listened to the discussions before calling for order. I propose we grant them probationary status. They can have membership with limited rights and responsibilities. We'll assign them a small sector to manage, perhaps the outer rim territories near the galactic edge. If they prove themselves over the next century, we can consider full membership. The vote was overwhelming. Humanity would get their chance, but they would start at the bottom. When Chen returned to hear the decision, she accepted it gracefully. Thank you for this opportunity. We won't disappoint you. As she prepared to leave, General Krex approached her privately. Captain, I hope your people understand what they're getting into. Space is dangerous. There are threats out there that make your planetary wars look like children's games. Chen smiled, an expression that didn't translate well to most alien species, but somehow conveyed both confidence and warning. General, with respect, you have no idea what humans are capable of when we're truly threatened. Let's hope you never have to find out. She left the chamber, leaving General Krex with an odd feeling that he had just missed something important. 3 days later, reports began arriving from the galactic rim. Long-range sensors had detected something massive moving between the stars, something that consumed entire solar systems as it traveled. The Void Swarm, a threat from outside the galaxy, had returned after 10,000 years of absence. General Krex stared at the reports and remembered the human captain's words. Perhaps they were about to discover exactly what humans were capable of after all. 6 months after humanity joined the Galactic Council, everything changed. The first reports came from the Outer Rim territories, the same region where humans had been assigned their small sector of space. Scout ships sent frantic messages about entire star systems going dark. When investigation fleets arrived, they found nothing but empty space and debris clouds where planets used to be. General Krex stood in the Council's military command center, watching the tactical displays with growing alarm. Red zones marked the areas where the Void Swarm had struck. The pattern was clear and terrifying. They were eating their way through the galaxy like a disease. How many systems have we lost? He asked his aide, a young officer whose scales had turned pale with stress. 17 confirmed, sir. Maybe more. Communications are breaking down as they advance. Krex's claws tapped nervously on the metal railing. The Void Swarm was supposed to be extinct, destroyed by the ancient civilizations 10,000 years ago. The old records spoke of creatures that could consume entire worlds, turning all matter into more of themselves. They were living ships, each one the size of a city, traveling in fleets of millions. Ambassador Zethkar hurried into the command center, his 4 eyes wide with panic. The Council is demanding answers. How did our defenses fail so completely? Our defenses worked exactly as designed, General Krex replied grimly. The problem is that these things don't follow the rules of civilized warfare. The main screen showed footage from the Battle of Kepler's Gate, where the Council's Third Fleet had made their first major stand against the swarm. The recording was difficult to watch. Council dreadnoughts, massive ships that had dominated space battles for centuries, fired their main weapons at the advancing swarm vessels. The energy beams that could crack planets bounced off the organic hulls like flashlight beams. The swarm didn't return fire in any recognizable way. Instead, they simply surrounded the council ships and began consuming them. Metal, energy, crew members. Everything was absorbed and transformed into more swarm creatures. Within hours, the Third Fleet was gone and the swarm was noticeably larger. They adapt, Krex explained to the gathered officers. Every weapon we use against them, they learn to resist. Every tactic we try, they counter within days. It's like fighting an enemy that becomes stronger with every battle. Counselor Veltara materialized in the command center, her energy form flickering with distress. I've been reviewing the ancient archives. The old civilizations face the same problem. Traditional military tactics are useless against the swarm. Then what stopped them before? Sethkar asked. No one knows. The records from that time are incomplete. All we know is that the threat was eliminated and the surviving species swore never to let it return. They built the Deep Space Monitoring Network to watch for signs of the swarm's return. General Krex pulled up the current tactical situation. The red zones were expanding faster now, spreading toward the core worlds where billions of galactic citizens lived and worked. At this rate, they'll reach the inner systems within 2 years, maybe less. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed that information. 2 years to save galactic civilization. What about evacuation? An officer suggested. Where would we go? Veltara asked sadly. The swarm follows energy signatures and life signs. There's nowhere to run. Sethkar's mandibles clicked with agitation. We need to consider every option. What about the humans? Their sector is directly in the swarm's path. Krex brought up the human territories on the display. The small cluster of systems looked pathetically vulnerable compared to the advancing red zones. They've been sending reports, but they're not asking for evacuation. Strange. What kind of reports? Industrial surveys, resource assessments, construction permits. It's like they're planning to build something instead of running away. The officers exchanged glances. Either the humans didn't understand the threat they faced, or they had some plan the council didn't know about. Should we contact them? Sethkar asked. General Krex considered it. The council had never asked a probationary member for military assistance before. It went against every protocol and tradition, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Send a message to Captain Chen. Formal diplomatic channels. Tell them we're requesting additional resources to assist with the current crisis. The message was carefully written to maintain the council's dignity while asking for help. It took 3 days to compose with input from dozens of diplomatic experts. The final version was a masterpiece of bureaucratic language that somehow managed to ask for military aid without actually admitting they needed help. Captain Chen's reply arrived within hours. It was disappointingly brief. Council request acknowledged. Terra Command is mobilizing for full deployment. Recommend clearing commercial shipping lanes in sectors 7 through 23 for heavy transport traffic. Human fleet deployment ETA 6 weeks. Stand by. That's it. Sethkar stared at the message in confusion. No questions about the threat? No requests for tactical data? No demands for payment or political concessions? General Krex was more focused on the practical details. Sectors 7 through 23? That's not just the shipping lanes to human territory. That covers a quarter of the inner galaxy. Maybe they misunderstood the scope of the crisis, an aide suggested. Before anyone could respond, new alerts began flashing on the tactical displays. Long-range sensors were detecting massive energy signatures moving through hyperspace toward the galactic core. The signals were enormous, far larger than any known ship class. Are those swarm vessels? Sethkar asked nervously. The sensor operator checked the readings twice before answering. No, sir. The energy patterns are all wrong. These signatures are mechanical, artificial, and they're coming from human space. Over the next few days, the sensor readings became clearer and more alarming. Thousands of ships were moving through hyperspace, many of them larger than Council dreadnoughts, but they weren't warships in any recognizable sense. The energy signatures suggested industrial vessels, cargo haulers, construction ships, mobile refineries, and manufacturing platforms. What are they doing? Veltara wondered aloud as she studied the data. General Krex was beginning to suspect he knew, and the thought both excited and terrified him. I don't think they're coming to fight alongside us. I think they're coming to fight instead of us. The first human ships began arriving exactly 6 weeks after Chen's message. They didn't report to Council Command or request permission to enter controlled space. They simply appeared at the edge of human territory and began working. Within days, asteroid mining operations appeared throughout the sector. Massive industrial ships began consuming entire asteroid belts, processing the raw materials into something else. Construction platforms appeared around dead planets, building structures that didn't match any known design patterns. What are they building? Zethkar demanded during an emergency council session. General Krex had been studying the human activity with growing fascination. I'm not sure, but whatever it is, they're building a lot of it. Our analysts estimate they're processing more raw materials in a week than most civilizations use in a year. Should we demand an explanation? Before Krex could answer, another message arrived from Captain Chen. Council forces are advised to maintain minimum safe distance of 10 light-years from human operational areas. Construction activities may present navigation hazards. Updates will be provided as situation develops. The message was polite but firm. The humans were telling the entire Galactic Council to stay away while they worked. The audacity, Zethkar muttered. They're probationary members. They can't just claim territory and exclude Council oversight. General Krex wasn't so sure. Something about the scale and speed of human operations suggested they knew exactly what they were doing, and for the first time since the swarm appeared, he felt a small spark of hope. The swarm was still advancing, consuming everything in its path. Council fleets continued to engage and continued to lose, but somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humanity was building something that might change everything. General Krex had seen many strange things during his military career, but nothing prepared him for what he witnessed when the first human fleet finally revealed itself. The Council observation ship held position at the edge of the human operational zone, maintaining the minimum safe distance Captain Chen had requested. Through the ship's sensors, Krex watched an industrial operation that defied everything he thought he knew about warfare. How many ships are there? He asked his aide, staring at the tactical display. We've counted over 15,000, sir, and that's just in this sector. Intelligence reports similar buildups in 7 other locations. 15,000 ships. The entire Council Navy had fewer than 3,000 vessels, accumulated over centuries of shipbuilding by dozens of species. The humans had matched that number in 6 weeks, but these weren't traditional warships. The human fleet looked more like a mobile civilization than a military force. Massive cargo vessels moved between industrial platforms, carrying processed materials and completed equipment. Construction ships assembled structures in space that looked more like cities than military bases. Refinery vessels worked constantly, breaking down asteroids and converting the raw materials into something else. What are they building? Krex wondered aloud. His question was answered when a new ship approached the observation vessel. It was smaller than the industrial giants, but still impressive. Sleek, angular, and clearly designed for combat. A message came through on standard diplomatic channels. Council vessel, this is Admiral Torres of the Human Defense Fleet. Permission to come aboard for tactical briefing? Admiral Torres turned out to be a woman about the same size as Captain Chen, but where Chen had been diplomatic and careful, Torres radiated controlled aggression. She wore a military uniform covered in symbols and decorations that meant nothing to galactic observers, but somehow conveyed authority and experience. General Krex, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. I've read your service record. Impressive career. Battle of the Crystal Nebula was a masterpiece of tactical thinking. Krex was surprised that she knew about his battles, much less approved of them. Thank you, Admiral. I must admit I'm curious about your operations here. This doesn't look like any military deployment I've seen. Torres smiled, an expression that looked friendly but had sharp edges. That's because you've been thinking about this wrong. You're preparing to fight a war. We're preparing to win one. She activated a portable display device that showed the current tactical situation. The red zones marking swarm territory had grown significantly in the past weeks, but Torres seemed unconcerned. Your people have been fighting these things the same way you fight each other, she explained. Big ships, heavy weapons, direct confrontation, honor duels in space. But the swarm isn't playing by your rules, so why should we? What do you mean? Krex asked. Torres changed the display to show detailed scans of swarm vessels. They're not machines. They're organic. They need resources to grow and reproduce. They follow predictable patterns when they feed. And most importantly, they've been fighting the same kind of enemies for thousands of years. They're not adapted to deal with us because we're different, because we're insane, Torres said matter-of-factly. At least by galactic standards, you fight wars to achieve political objectives. We fight wars to eliminate threats. You worry about honor and rules and keeping casualties low. We worry about winning. She brought up footage from recent swarm attacks showing the creatures consuming council ships with terrifying efficiency. Look at how they attack. They surround larger vessels and overwhelm them with numbers. Classic pack hunting behavior. But what happens when there are no large vessels to surround? The display changed to show human ship designs. They were smaller than council dreadnoughts, but there were thousands of them. Fast, maneuverable, and built for hit-and-run tactics rather than sustained combat. Swarm tactics work against traditional fleets, Torres explained. They don't work as well against swarms of their own. When they try to surround one of our ships, 50 others attack them from different directions. When they adapt to defend against those attacks, we change our approach. Kreck studied the tactical data with growing interest. This is unconventional. It gets better, Torres said. Or worse, depending on your perspective. Show me your standard battle doctrine. Krex pulled up council military protocols on his personal device. The rules of engagement were thousands of pages long, covering everything from acceptable weapon types to proper treatment of prisoners to restrictions on targeting civilian areas. Torres read through the first few pages and shook her head. This is why you're losing. You're fighting a polite war against an enemy that wants to eat everything you've ever loved. Let me show you our rules of engagement. She activated her own device and displayed a single sentence. Eliminate the threat by any means necessary. That's it? Krex asked. That's it. No restrictions on weapon types. No limits on acceptable targets. No concern for enemy casualties or infrastructure damage. When something threatens humanity's survival, we don't hold back. To demonstrate her point, Torres showed him footage from the first human engagement with the swarm. It had happened 3 days ago in a system that contained nothing but asteroids and gas clouds. The swarm had been feeding on the mineral-rich rocks when human forces arrived. The attack was unlike anything in Council military history. Instead of forming up in battle lines and exchanging fire at long range, the human ships simply scattered and began attacking from every direction at once. Small, fast vessels darted in and out of swarm formations, firing missiles and energy weapons before disappearing into the asteroid field. When the swarm tried to adapt and spread out to counter the human tactics, the humans changed their approach. Larger ships appeared and began pushing asteroids into swarm vessels at high speed. The impacts didn't destroy the organic ships immediately, but they disrupted their formation and damaged their ability to maneuver. Then the humans did something that made Krex's blood run cold. They began firing weapons at the asteroids themselves, breaking them into high-velocity fragments that tore through both swarm and human ships without discrimination. Several human vessels were destroyed by their own tactics, but their crews had apparently accepted that risk. You killed your own people, Krex said, horrified. We killed the enemy, Torres corrected. The crews of those ships knew the risks and accepted them. Sometimes winning requires sacrifice. The battle footage continued, showing the swarm's confusion as human tactics became increasingly chaotic and unpredictable. When the organic ships tried to consume disabled human vessels, they found that many of them had been rigged with explosives that detonated inside the swarm creature's feeding apparatus. When the swarm tried to retreat, they discovered that the humans had somehow mined their escape routes with automated weapons platforms. By the end of the engagement, the entire swarm formation had been destroyed. The human fleet had lost nearly 30% of its ships, casualties that would have been considered catastrophic by Council standards. But they had achieved something no Council fleet had managed. They had actually eliminated a swarm force instead of just delaying it. This is madness, Krex said. But his tone suggested fascination rather than criticism. This is war, Torres replied. Your people fight like you're trying to teach the enemy a lesson. We fight like we're trying to make sure they can never threaten us again. There's a difference. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. General, I respect your military traditions and your concern for honorable combat. But honor doesn't mean much to the families of dead civilians. The swarm is 2 weeks away from reaching the core worlds. When they get there, they won't be concerned about your rules of engagement. What do you need from us? Krex asked. Stay out of our way, Torres said bluntly. Your ships are too big, too slow, and too predictable. They'll just give the swarm more resources to work with. Let us handle this our way. After she left, Krex sat alone in his quarters studying the tactical data from the human engagement. The casualties were horrific by galactic standards, but the results were undeniable. For the first time since the swarm appeared, someone had actually hurt them. He activated his communication system and sent a priority message to the Council. Recommend full cooperation with human military operations. Their tactics are unconventional but effective. Suggest all Council forces maintain support role while humans engage primary targets. The reply came back within hours. Request denied. Council forces will continue standard engagement protocols. Human probationary status does not grant them operational authority. General Krex stared at the message for a long time, then made a decision that would have consequences far beyond anything he imagined. He opened a secure channel to Admiral Torres. Admiral, this is General Krex. Unofficial communication. What do you really need to stop this thing? Torres' reply was immediate. Time, space, and no questions asked about our methods. Can you give us that? Krex thought about the advancing swarm, about the billions of lives in the core worlds, and about the Council's stubborn adherence to rules that were getting them all killed. Yes, he said, I can give you that. The emergency klaxons in the Council chambers had been wailing for 6 hours straight. Counselor Veltara's energy form flickered with stress as she watched the tactical displays, showing the fall of Luminos, her homeworld and the crown jewel of the ethereal coalition. The swarm had reached the core worlds ahead of schedule. Instead of the predicted 2 years, they had adapted and accelerated their advance. Luminos, with its floating crystal cities and population of 12 billion energy beings, was dying in real time on the Council's screens. How long before total planetary consumption? Ambassador Zethkar asked, his voice hollow with despair. General Krex checked the latest reports from the few remaining orbital stations around Luminos. 18 hours, maybe less. The swarm is feeding on the planet's energy grid directly. Every time we evacuate more people, they have less power to maintain the evacuation portals. The irony was cruel. The ethereal coalition's greatest technological achievement, their ability to convert their entire species into pure energy, had become their weakness. The swarm could absorb their energy forms even more efficiently than it consumed physical matter. Veltara pulsed with determination. What about the human fleet? They promised unconventional tactics. The humans are... Krex paused, trying to find the right words. They're doing something unprecedented, but I'm not sure even they can save Luminos at this point. On the screens, massive organic structures had grown across Luminos's surface like a cancer. Swarm-feeding tentacles drained energy from the planet's core while processing centers converted matter and energy into new swarm creatures. The sight was both fascinating and horrifying. Suddenly, new contacts appeared on the long-range sensors. Ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, but not just a few ships. Thousands of them. The human fleet had arrived in force. Admiral Torres's voice crackled over the communication system. Council Command. This is Human Defense Fleet Alpha. We're assuming operational control of this engagement. All Council forces are ordered to minimum safe distance of 50 million kilometers. 50 million? Zethkar sputtered. That puts us outside the entire system. That's the idea, Torres replied curtly. Terra Command has authorized Protocol Omega. Moral restrictions are lifted. Total War Doctrine is now in effect. General Krex felt ice in his veins. He had learned enough about human military doctrine to know that Protocol Omega was their equivalent of declaring that nothing, absolutely nothing, was off limits in the pursuit of victory. Admiral, Veltara interrupted, her voice desperate, there are still millions of my people trapped on that planet. Surely you're not going to... We're going to save as many as we can, Torres cut her off. But make no mistake, Counselor. If we can't save your people, we will make sure the swarm pays the maximum possible price for killing them. Stand by. The human fleet split into multiple formations, each one larger than the entire Council Navy. But instead of heading directly for Luminos, they began moving to different positions throughout the system. Some ships headed for the outer planets, others took positions near the star itself. What are they doing? Krex wondered aloud. His answer came when the first human ships reached Luminos's outer moon. Instead of engaging the swarm forces directly, They began firing massive kinetic projectiles at the moon itself. The impact sent huge chunks of rock spinning away from the moon's surface. "They're breaking up the moon," a sensor operator reported in disbelief. But it was more than that. The humans were calculating the trajectory of each fragment, turning Luminos's own moon into thousands of high-velocity projectiles aimed at the swarm formations orbiting the planet. The organic ships tried to dodge, but there were too many fragments coming from too many directions. The swarm adapted quickly, as they always did. The organic vessels began secreting some kind of hardening compound that helped them absorb the impacts. But the humans had anticipated this. As soon as the swarm ships hardened their outer shells, human ships appeared at close range and began firing concentrated energy beams that turned the hardened shells brittle and caused them to shatter. "Incredible," Krex murmured. "They're using the enemy's own adaptive responses against them." The battle escalated rapidly. The swarm sent reinforcements up from the planet's surface, creating massive biomechanical structures that fired living projectiles at the human fleet. The humans responded by ramming damaged ships directly into these structures, their crews apparently accepting certain death to eliminate strategic targets. But the real shock came when human ships began approaching Luminos's star. "What are they doing to our sun?" Velterra asked in alarm as sensors detected massive energy discharges near the star's surface. General Krex studied the readings with growing horror and admiration. "They're destabilizing it. They're going to use the star itself as a weapon." The humans had somehow managed to disrupt the delicate fusion processes that kept the star stable. Solar flares erupted with devastating force, sending waves of radiation and charged particles racing toward the inner planets. The swarm creatures on Luminos tried to adapt to the increased radiation, but the humans had timed the attack perfectly. While the organic ships were still adjusting to the new environment, human forces struck with everything they had. The assault was absolutely brutal. Human ships that had been hidden throughout the system suddenly revealed themselves and opened fire. Weapons that violated dozens of galactic warfare treaties turned sections of space into killing fields. Some human vessels simply accelerated to near light speed and crashed into swarm formations. Their crews vaporized instantly, but taking entire enemy squadrons with them. "This is insane," Zethkar said, watching human casualties mount into the hundreds of thousands. "They're throwing away lives like they mean nothing." "No," General Krex corrected, finally understanding what he was witnessing. "They're spending lives like they mean everything. Every human who dies in this battle dies to save someone else. They're not being careless with their people, they're being strategic." The proof came when the humans executed their most audacious maneuver yet. A full quarter of their fleet, nearly 3,000 ships, formed up in a massive wedge formation and accelerated directly toward Luminos's surface. The swarm creatures there concentrated their defenses to meet this obvious suicide attack, but it was a feint. While the swarm focused on the approaching fleet, human evacuation ships, vessels so small they barely registered on sensors, darted down to the planet's surface and began extracting survivors. They worked in perfect coordination with the sacrificial fleet above, timing their movements to avoid the worst of the fighting. The evacuation lasted only minutes, but in that time, the humans managed to save nearly 2 million ethereal coalition citizens. The cost was staggering. The entire sacrificial fleet was destroyed along with their crews. But those 3,000 ships had tied up the entire swarm presence on Luminos long enough for the evacuation to succeed. As the last rescue ship cleared the planet's atmosphere, Admiral Torres gave the order that made General Krex realize he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic military history. "All units, execute Solar Storm Protocol. Full stellar destabilization in 30 minutes. Any ship not clear of the system by then will be lost." The remaining human fleet began a fighting retreat, engaging swarm forces just long enough to ensure they followed the withdrawing ships away from Luminos. Meanwhile, the destabilization process reached its climax. Luminos's star erupted in a controlled nova, sending a wave of destruction racing through the system. The blast vaporized everything within 100 million kilometers. Luminos, its moons, the swarm forces, and several human ships that hadn't retreated fast enough. When the energy wave passed, the entire system was empty except for cooling stellar debris and the scattered remains of one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. "They destroyed an entire star system," Zethkar said in a voice barely above a whisper. "They denied it to the enemy. Torres corrected over the communication channel. The swarm can't feed on what doesn't exist, and we saved 2 million people who would have died anyway. Veltara's energy form pulsed with complex emotions, grief for her lost homeworld, gratitude for her saved people, and something like awe at the humans' willingness to accept such terrible costs. "Thank you," she said simply. Torres's reply was grim. "Don't thank us yet, counselor. This was just one system. The main swarm fleet is still out there, still growing, still heading for the galactic core. What we did here was just a demonstration." "A demonstration of what?" General Krex asked. "Of what happens when humans stop trying to be civilized," Torres said. "The real war starts now, and I promise you, before this is over, you're going to see exactly what a human army looks like when we stop holding back." The communication channel went silent, leaving the council representatives alone with the tactical displays, showing the expanding cloud of stellar debris that had once been one of the galaxy's most beautiful worlds. General Krex stared at the data, calculating casualty figures and strategic implications. The humans had lost over 100,000 people in a single battle, casualties that would have broken any council species. But they had also proven that the swarm could be hurt, could be denied resources, could be forced to pay a price for their advance. The final battle for galactic civilization began in the most unlikely place possible, the ancient shipyards orbiting Galactic Central, where the Council's greatest vessels had been built for over 10,000 years. General Krex stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical displays with a mixture of terror and fascination. The swarm had established a massive hive structure around the galactic core, a biological megastructure so large it could be seen from neighboring star systems. It pulsed with dark energy, growing larger every day as it consumed everything within reach. "Final count?" he asked his aide. "The hive structure extends across 17 light-years at its widest point. Conservative estimates suggest it contains over 50 million individual swarm creatures, plus the central intelligence that's been coordinating their attacks. 50 million. The number was beyond comprehension. Every swarm creature they had fought so far had been just a tiny part of this vast organism. Scouts and workers preparing the way for something that defied description. Admiral Torres materialized on the bridge via hologram, her image flickering with transmission static from the massive interference the hive was generating. She looked tired. No, exhausted. But her eyes still held the cold determination that had carried humanity through months of brutal warfare. "Status report, Admiral?" Krex asked. "All human fleets are in position," she replied. 83,000 combat vessels, 200,000 support ships, and about 6 million people who volunteered for the final assault. "We're as ready as we'll ever be. 6 million volunteers." The number hit Krex like a physical blow. The entire human military had grown from a few thousand ships to this massive armada in less than a year, and apparently every single crew member was there by choice. "What about the weapon?" Counselor Veltara asked, her energy form pulsing nervously. "The one you've been building?" Torres' expression became even more grim. "Project Endgame is complete. We've confirmed that it will work. But Admiral..." She paused, looking directly at Krex. "You need to understand what we're about to do. This isn't just about stopping the swarm anymore. This is about making sure nothing like them can ever exist again." Before Krex could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The swarm hive was moving, extending massive tendrils of organic matter toward the approaching human fleet. Each tendril was the size of a small moon, covered in weapon systems that made Council dreadnoughts look like toys. "All ships," Torres broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. "Execute Protocol Endgame. Authorization Alpha 007. God help us all." What followed was unlike any battle in galactic history. The human fleet didn't form up in traditional battle lines or attempt coordinated maneuvers. Instead, they scattered in every direction, creating a sphere of chaotic movement around the swarm hive. But this wasn't the same hit-and-run tactics they had used before. Every human ship seemed to have a specific target and mission, part of some vast plan that only they understood. Some vessels dove straight toward the hive's defensive systems, accepting certain death to clear the way for others. Some ships began towing massive objects that registered as artificial asteroids but moved with deliberate purpose. The swarm responded with terrifying efficiency. The organic weapon systems fired living projectiles that could track their targets across vast distances. Defensive creatures emerged from the hive structure, each one larger than a council battle cruiser. The space around the galactic core became a killing field where entire fleets died in minutes, but the humans kept coming. For every ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. They seemed to have an unlimited supply of vessels and crew members willing to die for their cause. "What are they doing?" Zethkar demanded, watching the tactical displays from the Council Command Center. "They're just throwing away lives." General Kreck studied the battle patterns more carefully. "No, look at the targeting priorities. They're not trying to destroy the hive. They're hurting it." It was true. Every human attack was pushing the swarm forces toward a specific location, concentrating them around the galactic core itself. The organic creatures fought back viciously, but they were being manipulated into exactly the position the humans wanted. The realization of what Project Endgame actually was hit Krex like a cold wave. "They're going to collapse the galactic core. They're going to turn the central black hole into a weapon." Veltara's energy form flared with shock. "That's impossible. The gravitational forces alone would destroy half the galaxy." "Not impossible." Torres's voice crackled over the communication system. "Just really, really expensive. We've been placing gravitational resonance devices around the core for months. When activated simultaneously, they'll destabilize the black hole's accretion disk and create a controlled gravitational cascade." "Controlled?" Krex asked. "Relatively speaking. The gravitational wave will only destroy everything within about 1,000 light-years of the core. The rest of the galaxy should survive. Should survive." The casual way she said it made Krex realize just how desperate humanity's solution really was. They were willing to destroy the galactic core, the center of trade, government, and civilization, to eliminate the swarm threat. "How many people live in that area?" Veltara asked quietly. Torres was silent for a moment. "About 400 billion across 800 worlds. But if we don't do this, the swarm will eventually consume the entire galaxy. Every world, every species, everyone. This way some of us survive." The calculation was brutally simple. Sacrifice 400 billion lives to save the trillions throughout the rest of the galaxy. It was the kind of decision that would have been debated in council chambers for decades, if it had been considered at all. But the humans had made the choice and were already implementing it. The battle reached its climax when the last human ships reached their designated positions. The swarm hive, now concentrated around the galactic core exactly as the humans had planned, unleashed everything it had. The organic weapons fire was so intense that space itself seemed to burn. Then Admiral Torres gave the final order. "All units, activate endgame devices on my mark. Remember, we do this so that our children never have to." Mark. The gravitational resonance devices activated simultaneously across 1,000 light-years of space. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The central black hole's accretion disk began to collapse in on itself, creating gravitational waves that rippled outward at the speed of light. The swarm hive, caught at the epicenter of the gravitational cascade, simply ceased to exist. 50 million organic creatures, along with their central intelligence, were crushed into subatomic particles in the space of a few seconds. The threat that had consumed entire civilizations was gone, but so was everything else within 1,000 light-years of the galactic core. Worlds that had existed for millions of years vanished in gravitational tides that twisted space-time itself. The great shipyards, the ancient council chambers, the accumulated history and culture of 100 species, all of it disappeared into the artificial singularity the humans had created. When the gravitational waves finally passed, the galaxy was a very different place. The center was now an empty void where nothing could exist. But the outer regions survived as Torres had promised. Trillions of beings across thousands of worlds lived to see another day. General Krex found himself alone on his ship's bridge, staring at sensor readings that showed nothing where the galactic core used to be. His entire crew was in the observation lounges trying to process what they had witnessed. A priority message arrived from the Council's temporary headquarters on a rim world. It was from Zethkar, and it contained a formal request for General Krex to present a report on human military capabilities to the emergency session of the surviving council members. Krex stared at the message for a long time, thinking about everything he had seen over the past year. Then he began to compose his report. "Esteemed councilors," he wrote, "you have asked me to evaluate human military doctrine and capabilities after observing their role in the swarm war. After 18 months of direct observation and cooperation with human forces, I can provide the following assessment. We were wrong about everything. We thought we were observing a primitive species learning the rules of galactic warfare. Instead, we were watching apex predators who had spent their entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of eliminating existential threats. We asked them to follow our rules of engagement, our concepts of honorable combat, our limitations on acceptable tactics. They responded by demonstrating that war has no rules when survival is at stake. We criticized their willingness to accept casualties, their disregard for conventional strategy, their apparent chaos in battle. We failed to understand that this chaos was actually a form of organization we had never encountered, a military doctrine based on adaptability, sacrifice and absolute commitment to victory regardless of cost. In the end, humanity did not save galactic civilization by being like us. They saved it by being exactly what they are, a species that refuses to accept defeat, regardless of the price that must be paid for victory. The swarm is gone. The threat that destroyed previous galactic civilizations has been eliminated permanently. We will rebuild our worlds, our governments, our way of life.